Hello, everyone, and welcome to something a bit different that I'm trying. Welcome to the first ever episode of Lycan Lunacy. This series actually was supposed to start 2 weeks ago, but due to health issues I couldn't do a video that week. I was planning on waiting until waiting till next month, but but even though this is past how I wanted to start this, I just decided to just end the month with it. But yeah. So what is Lycan Lunacy? Well, every week where there is a full moon, I will be looking at a werewolf movie. The reason why I do this is I love werewolves. Out of all the classic movie monsters, werewolves are my absolute favorite. I literally bought this cane just for this review series. I am dead serious. But yeah, I was contemplating on what movie to start this series on. I went through a bunch of different ideas, and even some friends of mine that I talked to on a live stream, from one of Jenny Fear's videos. Which, by the way, seriously check her out if you haven't. She makes some good content. I decided, however, because the thing is, a lot of the really popular werewolf movies that a lot of people mention as the best, a lot of people have already talked about. People have already talked about Bad Moon and Ginger Snaps and An American Werewolf in London, including me, by the way. But yeah, because everybody has talked about those films, I wanted to do something different. So we're going to take a look at the more lesser-known werewolf films to see if there's a diamond in the rough. After all, even though werewolf movies aren't as popular as they used to be, they still exist, and there still are werewolf movies that do come out. So I think we should see if any filmmakers have brought anything new to the table. And I figure what better film to start off than, there we go, Leigh Whannell's remake of The Wolfman. This film was released in January of last year, which is why I was not able to see it in theaters or cover it. I was still busy with college at that time. But yeah, this movie actually has a bit of development hell. But before we get to that, I want to express my thoughts on both the original and the 2010 remake of The Wolfman. So let's start. The original The Wolfman, which was released in 1941, is my personal favorite of all the Universal monster movies from the old days. Yes, there are parts of that film that I don't want to say haven't aged well, but compared to more recent werewolf films that came out afterwards, it definitely does lack in a lot of the enjoyment that future werewolf movies get. But the original is still a classic, thanks to its great werewolf makeup and Lon Chaney Jr.'s fantastic performance. It's an oldie, but a goodie, and it still gets the respect as the first official fantastic werewolf movie. Fast forward to many years later, and in 2010 we got another remake of The Wolfman. This time starring, I'm probably butchering this, Benicio del Toro, Victor Hugo Weaving, and Anthony Hopkins. The 2010 remake, which also went through some development hell, got a lot of hate from people, a hate that I personally feel is unjustified. I'm not going to pretend that the 2010 remake is a great film, and it definitely doesn't hold a candle to the original, but it had some solid ideas. The acting was pretty decent. I loved the visuals of the film. While the CGI doesn't look that great, the practical effects, thanks to the legendary Rick Baker, is phenomenal. And the blood and gore is great. Seriously, the 2010 remake has some fantastic werewolf carnage. Seriously, the werewolf carnage in London scene is worth watching the film alone. That scene is awesome. But yeah, it definitely had its problems, and I can understand why it was a critical and box office failure. Now we talk about the more recent remake and its history. Plans for another remake of The Wolfman started back in 2016. To make a long story short, Universal Studios saw how successful Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe was, and they wanted to create their own cinematic universe around their own classic movie monsters. This resulted in a remake. There were plans for an Invisible Man remake that I believe would star Johnny Depp. Oh, I could be wrong though. And probably the funniest thing is that in the original script for this Wolfman remake was going to have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as the Wolfman. I am dead serious. Yeah, to quote Dr. Evil, how about now? Thank God that did not happen. But yeah, the reason why it didn't is because, well, the Tom Cruise Mummy movie, which was supposed to start off Universal's dark universe, did not go well. It was a critical and financial failure, and Universal Studios immediately fired the guy who was in charge of the dark universe. Now, because of that failure, Universal Studios instead decided, instead of a shared universe, they would just go back to standalone films. This started off with Leigh Whannell's remake of The Invisible Man. Which, hang on. Give me a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize. Come on, where is it? There we go. Okay. This remake. Now, just for clarification, I love the shit out of this movie. However, I do want to state, I have not watched any other adaptation or any other Invisible Man movie. So the Leigh Whannell film was my first introduction to the Invisible Man universe or whatever. And I know that some fans of the original Invisible Man really don't like the movie, but I loved the shit out of it. I thought Elizabeth Moss's performance... Excuse me. Elizabeth Moss's performance in the film, I thought, was fantastic, and it really just took something that has been done to death in Invisible Man and made it absolutely terrifying. Leigh Whannell legit took a story about a scientist who turned himself invisible and can't go back, to this horrifying tale about abusive relationships and how no matter how hard you try, they will never leave you. It was just such a brilliant take on the idea of an invisible man. But yeah. As for why Leigh Whannell was put in charge of the Wolfman, well, originally it was going to be the Wolfman remake was going to be directed by somebody else. I can't remember who, though, unfortunately. And it was going to have Ryan Gosling, known for playing Ken in the Barbie movies, as the wolf in the Barbie movie as the Wolfman. You know what? At least it's not Dwayne The Rock Johnson. However, due to scheduling conflicts, Ryan Gosling and that director dropped out, so Leigh Whannell went forward. Like a lot of people, I was really excited because, like I said, I loved Leigh Whannell's remake of The Invisible Man, and I'm a huge fan of Leigh's work all around, from Saw to Insidious to Upgrade. I just love this man's work. But yeah, I honestly was genuinely pissed that I couldn't catch this film in theaters. But what really surprised me was the negative feedback and reviews that this film had gotten. This movie was not beloved by critics or audiences. Critics were a lot kinder to it than they were to the 2010 remake, but it was still seen as a critical disappointment, and financially, it made $35 million against a $25 million budget. A lot. It made its money back, but compared to the remake of The Invisible Man, it wasn't even close. I hear some people say that was because it was a January horror film. I completely disagree. Because there have been cases where January horror films actually did make a profit. Megan was a January horror film. And so was Scream, and so was, I believe, Scream 5 and 6. I could be wrong though. And all three of those films not only were well received, but were financially successful. I think a lot of the reason why the film did not do so well was due to the critical feedback and how many people told people to stay away. So, because of that, I was dreading getting to this. I mean, seeing a bad movie from a director you like is nothing new, but it never is fun. It's similar to Barry Sonnenfeld fans watching 9 Lives or Wild Wild West. You just don't want to see a shitty film by a filmmaker you really do love and respect. So I was dreading this recent remake. And to my surprise, I actually enjoyed it. It's not as good as the original. It's not even as good as the 2010 remake. But due to all the negative backlash that this film got, I was expecting a dumpster fire, but I was pleasantly surprised. However, I do admit the film has problems. But yeah. But first, let's just start with the plot of the movie. This recent remake of The Wolfman is a very different retelling of the classic story. There's no Lawrence Talbot in the movie at all. The only similarities between this film and the original is that there's a werewolf, and that's kind of it. Excuse me. So it's kind of in the same territory as the 2019 remake of Child's Play. This in particular does not bother me though, and I will get to that. But first, let's talk about the plot. The movie follows a small family: a man named Blake, his wife Charlotte, and their daughter Ginger. I almost wonder if they named the daughter Ginger as a funny nod to Ginger Fitzgerald from Ginger Snaps. If so, cool. Anyway, Blake had just discovered that his father was officially confirmed as deceased, so he decides to go on a truck ride with his wife and daughter to collect his dad's stuff in a truck and maybe spend the summer there. However, when they get there, they get attacked by some wild creature, and Blake gets scratched. And the rest of the movie is the family spending the time in the house, while the scratch on Blake's arm gets worse and starts infecting him with an awful disease. But yeah. So let's get the easy criticisms of this film out of the way. For starters, for starters, I do not mind that this remake has little to do with the original. Honestly, in my opinion, that's the direction I wanted Lee Whannell to take this story in. Oh, and there's probably people being like, "Oh, well, what's the point of making a remake of The Wolfman if it doesn't even have the same characters?" Well, here's the thing. There have been similar cases like that where there's a remake that has very little to do with the original film but is beloved. A great example would be John Carpenter's The Thing, or even David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly. Those films don't have a lot in common with their original counterparts, but it makes up for that with its unique take on the story. Here's a little bit of a lesson in Remake 101. The reason why, artistic reasons why you do a remake is either for two reasons. Reason one, you think you can make it better than the original. Obviously, that's not going to happen here. The original Wolfman is a classic. The only things it can update is the effects and gore, but that's really it. So, if that's off the table, then you do option number two. You take the story in your own unique way and add a unique spin to it. And I do appreciate that this film does option two. We already got a remake of The Wolfman that is more of a remake of the original, so it makes sense for the second remake to be more of its own thing. But yeah. Now other major criticisms that people have brought up, well, actually, maybe I should wait till we get to that. Let's talk about the issues the movie has. Because a lot of people have already dogpiled on this film, let's talk about what does work, because there are good things in this. For starters, the acting in the film is pretty decent. Considering the material that this cast was given, they do the best with what they have. The one who really steals the show, however, is Blake. Not only does the actor do a phenomenal job, but this actor legitimately does have challenges to go through, as his body slowly changes more and more into a monster. And becomes more deformed and horrific looking. That's another thing. The makeup and practical effects in the film are really solid. The makeups guy for this film also did work on Pan's Labyrinth, and that shows. The blood, the gore, and the designs of the werewolves are all they all look fantastic. Let's get to the elephant in the room and the one thing that a lot of Wolfman fans really dislike about the movie. So give me a second. Give me a second, ladies and gentlemen. Alright, let me zoom you. Oh, shit. Hang on, I apologize. This is what the werewolf looks like. Now, like a lot of people, when I saw this design, it really didn't do it for me. It wasn't even that the design... It's not even that the design is awful, it just did not look like a werewolf. It looked a lot more... it looked a lot more like if one of the hillbillies from the hills had no from the Ron Turn films somehow screwed one of those monsters from The Descent and horrifyingly procreated. And if you think, I was not for this design. However, seeing the design in the movie, and I know I'm gonna sound crazy here, but the design actually grew on me. Now, hear me out. It is very clear that the way this movie approaches lycanthropy is far different than how the original or even the 2010 remake did it. The original Wolfman, as well as its 2010 remake, followed the basic rules of werewolf lore, where werewolves transform on a full moon, and they can only be killed by silver. This movie's depiction of lycanthropy is far different, though. This version of lycanthropy is treated more like a disease. I could be wrong, but I believe Lee Winnell and his wife, who wrote the screenplay, their inspiration for their approach to lycanthropy was AMS, or some disease like that. But in all honesty, the lycanthropy in this film comes off a lot more similar to rabies. Seriously think about it. Blake is attacked by a wild animal, and throughout the film, he becomes worse and sicker and more deranged. Which I could be wrong, but I believe that's the common effects of rabies. And honestly, that's not a bad that's not a bad take for something like lycanthropy. The movie pretty much treats the whole thing like a body horror film, similar to David Cronenberg's The Fly, and I think it's very effective. And I think that's why the werewolf looks like it does. It's not meant to look like a werewolf. It's meant to look more like someone who has a disease. They look sickly and deranged and ravenous, and with all that context, the design grew on me. And especially helps the way that the creature moves around and the sounds it makes. It may not look like a werewolf, but it certainly acts like one. I don't know. I don't know. The look of the werewolf in this movie reminded me a lot of Robert Pattinson's Batman. Let me explain. When the trailers for Robert Pattinson's The Batman came out, when the trailers for Matt Reeves's The Batman came out, I really did not like the look of Batman's outfit. It wasn't that it looked awful, but it just looked really bland to me, and it just looked really bland to me, and it just kind of looked like a carbon copy of the Christian Bale Batman suit, which is a Batman suit I already don't like. However, when I actually saw the movie, the suit really grew on me, and a lot of it was because of how Batman moved and how they did his gadgets. I legitimately went from not liking the suit to really enjoying it, and I actually had the same reaction to the look of the werewolf in this film. I can understand why some people don't like it. It is a very different look, but for me anyway, the design grew on me. But yeah. But yeah. That really is the bit. Also, like a lot of Lee Winnell's films, the movie is very well shot. I did hear from some critics that the lighting in the film is not good. And no offense to those critics, but I personally didn't have any issue. I thought the lighting was good. And in a lot of the dark scenes, I was still able to see what was going on. But yeah, I did hear, because Andy from Boots to Reboots, another YouTuber you should check out if you didn't, he personally felt that the reason why the werewolf was not on screen a lot was because the filmmakers were embarrassed of the design. An opinion that I personally disagree with. It's very clear that this movie is doing a similar effect to Jaws, building up the appearance of the Wolfman throughout the movie. So that when the design is finally revealed, it's legitimately shocking because it's a very different design than the usual design for a werewolf. But like I don't any furthermore, when the werewolf is finally revealed, it stays on screen throughout the entire rest of the movie. They don't keep the werewolf in shadow a lot during the final acts of the film. But like I said, that's just me. But yeah. However, but yeah, now let's talk about two of the most fun things about a werewolf movie: the gore factor, and the transformation sequences. The gore in the movie is good, like really good. This movie has some really vicious, nasty gore in it. And a lot of the reason why it's so effective is because this movie barely uses any CGI. Even when the Wolfman is on screen, you can tell it's a guy in makeup and prosthetics. I think the only time the film uses CGI was for the werewolf vision, which looked cool as hell, by the way. It was a really striking visual. And like the ideas that they took with the lycanthropy and how it slowly got worse were very effective and very well done thanks to the cinematography. Blake began. I love that scene where Blake hears the sound of a spider, and because of his enhanced senses, it sounds like thunder. I like how Blake can no longer understand what Charlotte and Ginger are saying. I like how his face gets more and more messed up. His hair starts falling out. Just a really cool approach. Just a really cool approach and idea to a werewolf transformation. Speaking of which, the transformation sequence, while I've definitely seen better, it looks solid for the most part. And again, a lot of that is because of the makeup and prosthetics. It actually looks like it's really there. This is definitely not the best werewolf effects nor transformation. That award still goes to An American Werewolf in London. But I personally felt that in terms of the gore and transformation, two of the most iconic elements of any werewolf film, I feel it did a solid job. However, this film does have problems, so let's finally get into it. For starters, I hate this poster. The posters for this movie were terrible. This is one of them, and there was another poster that showed Charlotte and Ginger in the woods alone. And I get what the marketing guy was going for. They don't want to show what the werewolf looks like. But there are ways of doing that while also making it intimidating. Here, let me give you a great example. The recent remake of Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. most of the posters for this film had a very similar approach to where they really didn't show what Count Orlok looked like in the remake. However, it worked in that film. However, it worked for the marketing because while they didn't show what Count Orlok looked like, they would do something like this, where they would show his hands or his shadow or his silhouette covered in shadow, creating a striking image. Like that movie knew how to advertise itself, and it's a lot of what and I think it's the reason why a lot of people were anticipating what Count Orlok looks like, especially considering how iconic the original the original Count Orlok look is. I feel like they should have done something more similar to this. In fact, the poster that I will be using for this thumbnail was legitimately the best poster I could find for the 2025 remake of The Wolfman, and it was even like an official poster. It was done by AMC. The marketing team sucked so bad. The marketing team sucked so horribly at their job that AMC created a better poster than the actual poster guys. Jesus, where's Drew Struzan when you need him? But I digress. And that may sound like a nitpick, but compared to how the posters for Nosferatu look, this is lame. This is a lame-ass poster for a Wolfman movie. Whoever came up with this poster, you suck. Go sit in the corner and don't come back until you suck less. Thank you. Now, let's get on to the actual legitimate issues the film has. The movie does have some very solid ideas. It does kind of seem like they want the lycanthropy to not only come off as a disease, but also kind of represent the cycle of abusive parents. It is established that Blake did not have a very strong connection to his father. So when he passed, and a lot of that is because he was afraid of his father due to how stern he was. And Blake fears that he'll become as aggressive and fearful as his dad was towards him. And that is not a bad theme for a werewolf movie. Using lycanthropy as a metaphor for an abusive parent is not an awful idea. The problem is that it's not done very well, and it's very sloppy. This theme is not really given a lot of attention in the film, to the point that you really don't even know what the movie is going for. Is lycanthropy meant to be more like a disease, or is it meant to be a metaphor? If it's meant to be both, then the writing really should have been a lot stronger here. And that is the biggest issue with this film, the writing. Leigh Whannell is a very talented writer. If you watch any of his movies, whether it be Saw, Insidious, or Upgrade, or his remake of The Invisible Man, you know that he is a very talented writer who really knows how to mix themes and ideas. But here it just feels very amateurish. I do have a theory, though. But this is a theory, so take what I say with a grain of salt. This movie was in development hell. And I have the feeling that maybe production on the film had already started when Ryan Gosling was chosen for the role. But because Ryan Gosling and the original director left, Universal Studios went to Leigh Whannell and said, "Hey, Lee, my man, our original plans for this Wolfman movie kind of got fucked over. Can you take over? But do it fast, or else some executives will lose some bonuses. Thanks, man." That's just how I personally think this went down. The script isn't awful, But compared to Leigh-Whannell's other work, it feels rushed and sloppy. I could be wrong though. It is very possible for even a good director to be a bad writer at times. John Carpenter wrote Halloween 2, and he hates the twist of Michael being Laurie's brother. Blaming those decisions on writer's block and too much alcohol. So it is very possible for a good writer and director to be a bad writer. But that's just how the movie feels. It feels rushed. And you definitely get that feeling with the characters. Out of the three main characters in this film, the only one that gets any real depth is Blake. And even then, the depth of him feels about as large as a kiddie pool. We don't really look a lot at Blake's history with his father, besides one flashback. He's a generic good father that slowly turns into a monster, which is not a bad idea, but that's been done before and done better. Even Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, a movie that gets a lot of criticism for Jack Torrance's descent into madness. Even in that film, it felt more organic, because the moment you see Jack, he already seems like a bit off-putting. But here, it's clear they're meant to go more for sympathy here, but because you don't get a lot of time with Blake to really get to know his character, it just doesn't work here. The other two characters, Charlotte and Ginger, are just blander than bread. His wife is... I can't remember a single thing about her besides the fact that she's a journalist. And their daughter, Ginger, is just the typical cute little girl in a horror film. And that's really about it. These characters aren't awful, but they're just not interesting, and they don't have a lot of depth. And that's a big problem, because these are our three main characters. You're spending an hour and 42 minutes with these people. And when all of these characters are not interesting, that creates a problem. It also is a big issue because it completely misses the point of the Wolfman movie, of the original Wolfman movie, and it's incredibly ironic because the 2010 remake had the same problem. What makes the original Wolfman work is the tragedy. In the original Wolfman, we get a chance to get to know Lawrence Talbot before he is bitten and contracts lycanthropy. We see that while he is a bit of a creeper and a homewrecker, he was an overall nice, charming, charismatic guy. Which made Lawrence's descent into madness with the lycanthropy all the more tragic. You legitimately felt sorry for Lawrence. That tragedy is a huge part of the Wolfman story, and it blows my mind that both remakes have completely missed that. Not that tragedy wasn't in the 2010 remake, but it wasn't really very much explored, and this film has the same problem. But yeah. That's really just the biggest issue with the film. It's writing. The writing... I feel like if this movie had a much stronger script, this would be a lot better. But because it isn't, it just feels meh. However, like I said, I did enjoy the movie. Yeah, it has some problems, but compared to all the negative criticism I've heard, I was expecting worse, but no, it's a serviceable werewolf film. But compared to the original Wolfman and even the 2010 remake, it definitely is a downgrade. I don't think the movie is awful, but it is a disappointment, especially since it's from Lee Winnell. I'm going to give Lee Winnell's remake of The Wolfman a C+. I was considering a C-, but because I got a little bit more enjoyment out of this than I thought, I'll be generous. I don't hate this movie, I don't even dislike it, but it is disappointing and it could have been a lot better. With that said, thank you all for joining me for the first ever Lycan Lunacy, and I hope you really enjoyed it. And I do have some exciting plans coming up. Again, give me a minute. Here we go. You see, there is a certain movie series that I've been avoiding for a long time. But for July, I think it's finally time. So yeah, tune in next week as we're going to enter Resident Evil month. Oh, it's not gonna be fun. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like what you see here, like, comment, and subscribe. Yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a nice day. See ya.